Have you ever wondered why a man begins to lose his grip on a woman? Not when she argues, not when she leaves, but when she outgrows him silently, spiritually, completely. There comes a moment when her soul no longer fits inside the smallness of his ego. The same woman who once met him with softness now meets him with distance, not because she stopped caring, but because she started seeing. What once felt magnetic now feels limiting. What once felt romantic now feels repetitive. Her heart, still kind, begins to ache for truth more than approval. And that is the moment she begins to ascend beyond him. The first sign, awareness, replaces attachment. When a woman outgrows a man's ego, it doesn't happen overnight. It begins quietly, in the spaces where his pride speaks louder than her truth. He mistakes her silence for agreement, not realizing that silence can be the soul's most elegant rebellion. Jung wrote that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But his ego resists transformation. It demands validation, not reflection. And in that resistance, she begins to feel the heaviness of spiritual stagnation. The woman he once knew, the one who laughed at his confidence, soothed his anger, made excuses for his emotional unavailability, slowly begins to vanish. She doesn't scream. She doesn't dramatize. She simply withdraws the energy that once sustained his illusion. You see, a woman's emotional energy is the most potent mirror a man will ever encounter. It shows him not only who she is, but who he is capable of becoming. But when his ego treats that mirror as possession, when he demands reflection without self-awareness, her spirit begins to fade from his world. She begins to see his patterns, how he mistakes control for care, dominance for strength, and attention for love. What she once excused as masculinity now reveals itself as fear. And though she may still love him, she no longer wishes to mother his unhealed wounds. The awakening of the feminine is rarely gentle. It's the recognition that she cannot shrink herself to protect another's comfort. She realizes that compassion without boundaries becomes self-betrayal, and patience without reciprocity becomes decay. From the outside, it looks like detachment. To him, it feels like loss. But internally, it's liberation. She begins to breathe differently, to move with the ease of someone who no longer seeks to be chosen. The same energy that once orbited around him now turns inward, illuminating everything she had abandoned within herself. She no longer measures love by intensity, but by peace. She no longer confuses chemistry with connection. And here lies the paradox. The moment she releases him, he begins to feel her more than ever. Her absence exposes the cracks his ego could not see. He starts to remember her laughter as music, her silence as gravity. The same woman he once dismissed as too emotional now becomes the haunting symbol of everything he never took the time to understand. Because the woman who outgrows a man's ego doesn't disappear. She evolves into a mirror that his consciousness can't stop looking for. Her spiritual growth becomes his unspoken obsession, not because she rejected him, but because she became what his ego feared most, a reflection of freedom. The second sign. Silence becomes self-respect. As she begins to evolve, her energy changes, and with it, the unspoken equilibrium between them collapses. The same woman who once absorbed his moods now observes them. The same heart that once tried to heal his wounds now recognizes the futility of bleeding beside someone who will not acknowledge his own pain. It is not that she stopped feeling. It is that she started seeing. She has stepped into the rare air of awareness, where love is no longer confusion disguised as devotion. He senses the shift long before he understands it. Her silence begins to unnerve him. Her laughter no longer arrives on command. Her eyes, once full of empathy, now carry a distance he cannot name. To a man ruled by ego, distance feels like betrayal. Yet what he does not realize is that she has not betrayed him. She has simply stopped betraying herself. Jung once said that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And this is precisely what she is doing, claiming that privilege, even if it means leaving behind the comfort of illusion. Every woman who outgrows a man's ego does so through the slow alchemy of disappointment. The moments he dismissed her intuition, the conversations that spiraled into defense rather than understanding, the subtle ways he minimized her light, each one became a seed of awakening. And when those seeds finally bloom, they do not produce anger. They produce clarity. That is what terrifies the unawakened man most, the calm clarity of a woman who no longer reacts. He may try to pull her back through guilt or nostalgia, weaponizing the past to restore his control. But she has seen behind the curtain. She knows that affection without accountability is manipulation, and that love without humility is ownership. She begins to speak less and observe more. Each silence becomes a boundary, each withdrawal a declaration. The woman who once tried to prove her loyalty now understands that true loyalty begins with the self. The third sign, detachment, becomes liberation. And yet, there is still tenderness in her. Growth doesn't harden her, it refines her. She does not hate him. That would still make her bound to him. Instead, she sees him with compassionate detachment. She recognizes that his resistance is not cruelty, but fear. Fear of irrelevance. Fear of intimacy, fear of meeting the mirror she has become. But compassion does not mean return. She knows that staying in a space where her spirit must shrink to keep the peace is no longer love. It is self-erasure. In this transformation, she embodies what the ancients called metanoia, a turning of the soul. Her priorities shift from being desired to being aligned, from being admired to being at peace. She stops asking, "Why doesn't he see my worth?" and begins to ask, "Why did I need him to?" That is the moment she rises, quietly and without ceremony, into her next level of being. And in her ascent, his ego begins to crumble. The man who once believed he could define her now chases the ghost of her energy. He begins to remember her not as a woman, but as an experience, something rare, unsettling, irreplaceable. He doesn't yet realize it, but her growth has become his initiation. Because the woman who outgrows a man's ego does not just leave him, she leaves him with himself. The fourth sign. Forgiveness becomes freedom. It is in the quiet aftermath of her detachment that the real unraveling begins. His world, once steady in its hierarchy, starts to quake beneath the realization that her energy had always been the gravity holding it together. He remembers how her presence softened his sharpness, how her empathy turned his arrogance into something tolerable. Without her, his confidence feels performative. The applause he once craved now sounds hollow, echoing in rooms where her intuition no longer lingers. What he thought was power was merely reflection. Her belief in him was the light he mistook for his own. The woman who has outgrown his ego doesn't rage or gloat. She walks away with the calm of someone who has made peace with her truth. In the language of the psyche, she has completed an initiation, a movement from attachment to autonomy. Jung described this as the process of individuation, the reconciliation between one's conscious self and the unconscious forces that govern behavior. For her, this means reclaiming every fragment she once handed away in the name of love. She calls back her intuition from his neglect, her softness from his entitlement, her laughter from his indifference. Each return strengthens her center, and yet she does not ascend in bitterness. The feminine that evolves spiritually does not reject the masculine. She redefines her relationship to it. She understands that every man she encounters is a mirror, reflecting the state of her own boundaries, her own unhealed beliefs about love. The one she outgrew was not a mistake. He was the teacher who revealed where she still abandoned herself. Now, her compassion extends to him, but it is no longer currency. It is wisdom. He, however, is still caught between admiration and resentment. He tells himself she changed, that she became cold, aloof, unreachable. But what truly unnerves him is that she is no longer impressed by his performance. She no longer flinches when he withdraws affection. She no longer explains herself when he misunderstands. To a man whose ego depends on dominance, her indifference feels like annihilation. But what he calls indifference is simply equilibrium. She has returned to her natural state, no longer tilted by his approval or rejection. She begins to attract differently now, not with the promise of healing others, but with the quiet radiance of someone who has healed herself. Her boundaries are not walls, they are doors, and not everyone is invited through. She has learned that not all connection is growth, and not all chemistry is divine alignment. The energy that once went into deciphering his moods now nourishes her purpose. She creates, she moves, she breathes in rhythm with her own expansion. The man who once mistook her care for weakness begins to understand what he lost, not a woman to control, but a mirror that challenged him to evolve. He begins to feel the echo of her absence, not as loneliness, but as accountability. For the first time, he senses that love without consciousness is only repetition, and that no woman can carry the burden of a man's unexamined self. Her growth was never against him. It was beyond him. And that is what ego cannot accept, that spiritual evolution requires separation from the familiar. Even when the familiar once felt like home, she doesn't look back, because her spirit now faces the horizon, where truth awaits in silence. The fifth sign. Wholeness replaces need. Time passes differently for her now. Days that once revolved around emotional turbulence have grown still, deliberate, and rich in inner meaning. Her solitude is not loneliness. It's a sanctuary where her spirit recalibrates. She has discovered that when you stop chasing validation, time itself slows down. Moments stretch open, revealing a new rhythm that belongs only to the self. What used to feel like emptiness is now space for peace, for reflection, for quiet joy untainted by expectation. He, on the other hand, lives in the collapse of his own narrative. The ego cannot exist without an audience, and her silence has dismantled his stage. He feels something unfamiliar, vulnerability. At first, he calls it heartbreak, but deep down, he knows it's exposure. Without her emotional reflection, he must now face what his arrogance had always concealed, the ache of unworthiness. Jung called this shadow confrontation, the moment when a man meets his own darkness without distraction. Her departure has forced that initiation. She didn't destroy him. She delivered him to himself. But this awakening doesn't come easily. He fights it at first. He tries to replace her with noise, new faces, fleeting admiration, hollow pleasures. Yet every encounter feels like an echo of what he once had, and none of them fill the void, because what he misses isn't her compliance, it's her consciousness. The way she once met him with emotional honesty, the way her presence grounded his chaos. He begins to realize that he didn't lose her. He lost access to the version of himself she awakened. Meanwhile, she continues her ascent, not away from love, but into a higher form of it. Her compassion is no longer self-sacrifice, it is discernment. Her strength is no longer defense, it is quiet certainty. She forgives him not as a favor, but as liberation. She forgives herself, too, for all the times she mistook tolerance for love. Forgiveness, she learns, is not about erasing pain, but about releasing identity. She no longer defines herself by what she survived. Each day, she feels more aligned with something larger, something Jung would have called the self, the unshakable center of the psyche. In this state, she no longer resists pain or seeks pleasure. She witnesses both with the calm of one who has integrated her shadow. Her desires are no longer chaotic, because they are no longer dictated by the need to be seen. The world around her changes in response. She attracts people, opportunities, and peace that match her vibration of self-respect. He senses her growth from afar, the same way one feels the shift of seasons without seeing the sky. He begins to understand that her detachment was not cruelty, but consequence. She did not punish him. She simply evolved beyond the frequency of his denial, and that realization cracks his ego open. In the silence she left behind, he begins to hear his own truth. Painful, humbling, necessary. Her outgrowing him was never about superiority. It was about resonance. Souls can only travel together as far as their awareness allows. And when one rises, the other must either rise too or be left behind. She didn't outgrow love. She outgrew the version of love built on unconscious need. Now she walks in stillness, her heart unbound. What once felt like ending now feels like emergence. Her spirit, no longer confined by his limitations, expands toward the infinite. And from that height, she finally understands not every connection is meant to last, but everyone is meant to awaken. As her inner landscape transforms, a quiet wisdom begins to anchor her. She no longer rushes to fill silence or to prove her love. She has learned that truth needs no performance. The same woman who once felt everything too deeply now moves through life with stillness that unsettles the unhealed. People sense the difference in her energy before she even speaks. It's softer, yet stronger. Her eyes no longer plead to be understood. They know the feminine that has outgrown the ego becomes magnetic in a new way, not through seduction, but through serenity. She no longer radiates energy outward to be validated. She draws it inward, and from that center, she emanates quiet power. Jung might have called this integration, the union of her nurturing emotional depths with the sharp clarity of discernment. She is no longer fractured between who she is and who she thought she should be to keep someone's love. She belongs to herself again. He, meanwhile, drifts through a fog of regret and revelation. He replays the past. But what torments him most is not what happened. It's the realization that she saw him clearly all along. She saw the wounds he hid behind confidence, the boy trapped inside the man, and she loved him, not despite those flaws, but through them. Yet love without growth always meets its limit. His ego, once too proud to bend, now bows beneath the weight of understanding. The loss of her respect hurts more than the loss of her affection, because deep down, he knows she once saw greatness in him that he refused to claim. Sometimes he imagines reaching out, telling her he finally understands, that he's changed, but he hesitates, sensing that even if she answered, she would not return. The bridge between them no longer exists. She burned it, not in anger, but in ceremony. The woman who once waited for his apology no longer needs it. Her closure is internal, her peace self-created. The power he once mistook for weakness has become her liberation. In that freedom, she begins to teach without speaking. Her very being becomes a lesson in sovereignty. She shows that healing is not loud. That transformation does not need an audience. Her joy becomes quiet rebellion against every man who thought control was love. She embodies what Seneca once described as tranquil strength, the serene confidence that comes from mastering one's emotions rather than being mastered by them. The more she expands, the more the world opens to her. She finds herself drawn to depth rather than drama, to men who listen rather than react. Her standards no longer come from pride, but from peace. She doesn't demand more. She simply no longer entertains less. What once felt like loneliness now feels like sacred solitude. And from that space, she finally sees love for what it was always meant to be. Not rescue, not obsession, not power, but partnership. He will remember her not as the one who left, but as the one who awakened him. Her absence becomes the teacher his pride once refused. And if he's brave enough to learn, he too may rise not to reclaim her, but to meet the part of himself her love tried to show him. Because in the end, the woman who outgrows his ego doesn't vanish. She becomes the mirror that his soul will spend a lifetime trying to find again. And then, one day, she stops looking back entirely. The pull of the past fades like a dream, dissolving at dawn. She no longer wonders if he misses her or if he's learned. Her curiosity has been replaced by calm. That is how you know a woman has transcended the ego's orbit, when she no longer needs closure from the person who wounded her, because her awareness has already turned pain into meaning. What once shattered her now shapes her. Her silence no longer hides sadness. It holds sovereignty. She has learned the most profound lesson of spiritual maturity. Detachment is not withdrawal from life, but full participation without ownership. She can love again, but this time, without losing the rhythm of her own heartbeat. She can listen without absorbing, give without depletion, forgive without reopening the wound. The energy she used to spend decoding others is now invested in creation of art, of work, of peace. He, somewhere on his parallel path, begins to sense her absence in new ways. The women who come after her feel different, more compliant, perhaps, but less alive. They don't challenge him, and though his ego is soothed, his soul feels strangely empty. He starts to understand the paradox that the woman who refused to worship his ego was the only one who ever touched his spirit. Her presence once illuminated him. Her absence now defines him. Every memory of her feels like a mirror he can no longer look away from. She has become his unfinished work. Yet her story has already moved beyond his comprehension. She has stepped into what Jung called individuation, the full integration of shadow and light. Her compassion no longer comes from the need to fix, but from understanding. She no longer sees the masculine as threat or salvation, but as counterpart. She walks beside life, not against it, not seeking dominance, but harmony. Her love, when it comes again, will be born from choice, not from wound. The world responds differently to her now. Opportunities unfold effortlessly. People respect her boundaries without needing explanation. There is an aura around her, a gravity that doesn't pull but steadies. It's the unmistakable energy of a woman who has faced herself completely. Men who once tested her now stand silently in her presence, unsure why her calm feels so unshakable. She has become what every ego fears and every soul craves, a being beyond need. And if he ever crosses her path again, she will greet him without resentment, perhaps even with warmth, but not with return, because she no longer belongs to the story where she must choose between love and self. She embodies both. He may recognize her body, her voice, her familiar smile, but not her essence. That part has ascended beyond the version of him who once held her. This is the truth Jung hinted at in his writings on the anima and animus. When the feminine rises in consciousness, it calls the masculine to evolve or to fade. She no longer carries his potential. She embodies her own. She is not waiting for anyone to rise with her. Her journey is her own creation now, and it unfolds not in noise, but in knowing. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses. If this message resonated with you, take a moment to breathe it in. Then like, share, and subscribe to help more women hear the truths they've forgotten to trust. And tell me in the comments what part of this awakening spoke to you most.